Okay, so this is the 101 of vibe coding, okay? And I'm gonna speak to you like if I were speaking to me a year ago or so, as if someone that didn't know anything about vibe coding, but you'll only need to understand the fundamentals in the beginning just to get a big picture idea, okay? And I'm not gonna leave out the stuff that's gonna bite you in the ass later, because I had that happen to me. I didn't know about certain concepts, and then it kind of bit me in the ass later because I would build with not that in mind. So I'm gonna try to do my best here to give you exactly what you need without overwhelming you, but enough of like a resolution for you to understand the different things that you're gonna run into, okay? So, Vibe Code Cowboys, let's begin. First and foremost, I want you to think about the vibe code cocktail, if you will, being a mix of these three different circles, right? You want to create something that is intriguing, it is challenging, and it causes some kind of distortion. And what I mean by these things here is, I think specific to me, okay? I was trying to make something that wasn't, just general. Because what I mean by challenging is if you're the type of person that likes having a problem solving nature to you, you're gonna enjoy vibe coding a lot more. So you should try to solve something that is a genuine problem in your life, and then switch it into being seen as a general challenge in your life, right? You'll hear a lot of people, if you've been looking at YouTube and stuff like that, talk about you should solve your own problems first as a vibe coder. And that's what I mean as well, because any problem is a challenge if you look at it that way. So you should do something that is challenging to you. It's creating a problem, and that problem is creating challenge, and so you should go towards that challenge. The second thing is intrigue. And intrigue is something that is also like, you're not just wanting to solve the problem so that the problem goes away, but you're also kind of intrigued on what it could become, like the possibilities on the other side of it, okay? If you have an app that, maybe reminds you to take out your dog for a walk, okay, that solves the challenge of forgetting to take your dog out for a walk. But what if it could also, tell you about nearby dog parks, or tell you about the best food for your dog breed, or tell you what kind of dog breeds would be the best friends for your dogs, right? That is like the intriguing part of your mind that should be set off with this idea as well. Because if there's absolutely no intrigue and it's pure challenge, yes, you're going to have this like stress to want to solve that problem, but you won't have the intrigue to continue to build through the tough times. And then if there's, market demand for it, you might want a version 2, a version 3, a version 4, etc., etc. So I think it's important to have an element of intrigue in the things that you decide to do. And then the last thing is distortion. And what I mean by distortion is that it should have a change. It should have a legitimate, proper change in people's lives. It should distort the way that people do things in a positive way, right? So it solves a challenge, it creates some intrigue, and then it distorts the future of web apps. It distorts the future of technology and what it could do. Okay. Now, these terms might seem a little big and grand and all that stuff, but it's just my mental way of thinking about what makes sense to build. It should have an effective change for distortion. It should solve a problem in the challenge, and it should excite me in some ways in the intrigue. Okay. So that's like the big three that you want to pay attention to when you're thinking about early stage, like idea validation. And then you'll be able to just go into it with a bit more of a precise thing, right? If it falls out of any one of these realms, chances are that it's, going to bore you, or it's not going to be enough to make any money, or it's not going to actually do anything for the end user. So you want to stay away from those and try to find the ones that match all three. Now, next thing to talk about here is going to be code and kind of the different components that you're going to run into, okay? If you've never heard of development, web development, there is what's called front-end development and back-end development, and then full stack development, okay? I'll talk about this third one here, the external, in a second, but for right now, front-end and back-end. So I myself do not have a technology background in a development sense. I've studied a little bit of Python, I've learned a little bit of HTML, just to kind of get a basic understanding, and back in the day to see if that was kind of my thing. Never really was, except for the element of UX or UI, okay? I made my first dollar online with graphic design. I offered someone graphic design services and all that stuff, and then I thought to myself, in expansion, what could I do? And I started to charge for UX design. And so UX design, if you don't know, is like what you see visually. The UI and the UX is the components that you see on a landing page or a website. In this case, it's this slideshow right here. And that intrigued me, naturally, because I love to think in terms of psychology and user experience and conversion rates in that regard. So that came naturally to me when I started to try to code that with AI, right? If I asked AI to build me a landing page or a front end and I would see the visual components, it was pretty easy for me to go into the code and understand, the different, I could see the text, I could see the colors, I could see the fonts. And so I could make changes in the code and technically be coding. But you know what I mean? Like I was still thinking it in terms of front end. So I myself, all that to say that I myself am more naturally a front end coder, right? But the back end is absolutely, absolutely necessary. And the back end in this case is mostly going to be databases. And then, some things like GitHub and deployment and stuff, which we'll talk about here in a second. But the back end is a lot of what makes your app work, right? The UX in the front end allows the user to understand what they can do. And then the back end allows them to do it, right? If that helps you understand. And so a lot of times you'll have people that are specialists, front end or back end, or you'll just have like a natural affinity or natural ability for one or the other. Okay, so don't get mad at yourself if you're not good at both of them. Having a full stack web developer that's at a high level is actually a pretty rare thing in the technology world. So don't worry about trying to be the best at both. Okay, so that being said, just good terms to know and just good ideas and concepts to have in your head as we're going through this. If it's a front end problem, it's like a front end, issue and stuff like that. And if it's a back end, there's a database. Now, one thing I will add in here, like if it's right here, is going to be the idea of a server. And a server is something that connects the front end to the back end, put very simply, right? There's a little bit more nuance to there, but we're going to talk about servers as well in the future. But for right now, generally speaking, front end, back end, the server in between those two. And now the third one is the external stuff. The external stuff is, in this case, what we're going to consider things that are connected by an API and any use of AI. So if I'm connecting ChatGPT to a build, then that is typically through an API. And then we also have the AI itself, which is like the prompting and the stuff like that we have to, make note of in our code and make note of how we're going to use it. So this is kind of the trifecta, if you will, of the stuff that you're going to be seeing and stuff that you're going to be dealing with. So I wanted you to have a good understanding of the different concepts and what they each contain. So to break down the front end just a touch more, we're not going to get too far into the weeds here, but I want you to understand which softwares correlate with the front end versus the back end, okay? The front end, you're going to be dealing with things like Cursor, Bolt, and Figma, all right? And Cursor, to be fair, is going to be doing both front end and back end, but I put it here because for the most part, you're going to see it as like a front end tool as you interact with it in the early stages at least. Then Bolt is going to be what I call an MVP builder. So if you've heard of Bolt or Lovable, or there's a new one called Base 44 and stuff like that, these are the things that help you. And usually their strong suit is the visual early stage builds, like the demo products. Okay, but you have to move them into something a bit more robust like Cursor or Tailwind. In our case, we're just going to use Cursor, but you can use Tailwind and stuff like that outside of this. But you're going to start it off in Bolt and then take it into Cursor. And then one step previous to that is going to be Figma. So if you're a real design heavy person and you want to design it in Figma, you can start in Figma, go to Bolt, and then go to Cursor, or go from Figma into Cursor. There's a couple different ways you could do that. And also Figma is getting smart as they are, and they are building their own version of like a vibe coding thing that maybe I can make a video on later. But these are the three that you're going to notice as far as being discussed for your front end and how are you going to use it. There's other things that I'll kind of get into later, like the actual like tech stacks, like the actual coding languages, like if you've heard of React or JavaScript and stuff like that. Again, gonna try to keep it overly simple here for the 101. We'll get into like the 201 a lot later. For the backend, you're gonna hear softwares like Supabase, GitHub, and Netlify. You might also hear Vercel. You might also hear Firebase. You might also hear, Microsoft Azure. There's a couple other things like that. But for our purposes, these are the ones that we're gonna get into. Supabase is going to be your database, which is going to house all the information of the users and then specific behaviors that they do, right? So if someone makes a purchase, it's going to log that purchase. Or if someone, signs up for a certain type of account, it's going to let them know, it's going to let you know through the database that it has that account and that tier. GitHub is going to be where your code lives. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. Netlify is going to be where you deploy your website, okay? And Again, a lot of these things were new to me as well. So if this is becoming overwhelming, take it easy, relax, take a chill pill. It'll all be figured out. Essentially, though, what's happening when it comes to vibe coding is that you're creating something that is a piece of code on your specific like laptop or desktop right now. That's called your local environment. Okay. Your local environment starts off with the code, but in order to connect that to the internet, we need to move into a remote environment, right? It's like a remote, it's not just in your local laptop setup, it's in the remote world and it's deployed to remote laptops separate from you, okay? So those two terms, local and remote, are going to be used a lot. And the reason why I bring that up is because GitHub allows you to go from local code to remote code, and Netlify allows you to go from local website to remote website, deployed website, right? It's not just in your private browser here, which is good, is what you want if you're doing testing or like early stage development, right? Like you want to build the thing before you release it into the world, of course. But there's a relationship between the local and the remote that takes some getting used to as to when you should update the remote based on your local and kind of like how to go between them. But that being said, a quick little aside into those topics, and let's get back on track here. So these are the back end things that you're going to notice. If you've heard of other things, let me know. I can try to maybe create a quick list of stuff like that, maybe some technical terms and softwares and stuff like that. But the key thing is that you want to try to realize what these things do eventually. For right now, we're going to use these. But you want to realize what they do so that eventually if you want to make changes to your tech stack and use different software, you can do that because you understand like the underlying function of what these things do, okay? And we'll get into that as time goes on. So obviously, having gone through just that stuff already, you've heard some terms that you're probably not familiar with. And these here are a couple other terms that you may not have heard of that I know I had to kind of get comfortable with. And it's totally natural for you to feel like you're learning an entire new language or an entire new thing, okay? A lot of these things are not needed outside of these circles of like technical programming or in our case, vibe coding. But obviously, if you're going to be a good vibe coder, you're going to want to get better at being able to tell your AI vibe coder what you want it to do. And so you want to understand the logic, right? The key thing here is that, I want to make sure you understand that you do want to be able to think like a programmer. You do want to be able to think like a code person, a coder or a product builder, okay? And that will help you build better. But you don't have to spend your time doing the code, okay? I've heard a lot of people kind of going back and forth from like, oh, the AI coder is not worth it, or it's worth it, or it's not worth it. It's like if you want to build a home, maybe you're really good at understanding the home, but you have to move a lot of dirt or concrete or lumber to get there. Do you want to use a backhoe or do you want to just carry bags of concrete by hand in order to make that home, which is like your vision, right? And so that's the same idea, okay? Like we're not taking pride necessarily in the fact that we write code ourselves. We're taking pride in the fact that we have ideas, that we are able to be creative and be problem solvers to use these AI coding platforms to make something that we know would be useful to the end user. And that's that, okay? We're not trying to take coders' jobs. We're not trying to call ourselves coders necessarily in like the traditional sense. I very specifically tell people that I do vibe coding. I don't do like coding. I do AI consulting, if you will, but I'm not like a traditional coder, and that's okay. But what I will do is learn the language of it so I can get better at prompting what I need to in order to make what I want. Now, moving on to once you actually have something built, okay? It's a never-ending process of making it better and better and better. And this is the matrix, the fundamental matrix I want you to try to understand and try to use when it comes to making improvements on your code, okay? So you're going to build something, right? You're going to build something and it's going to be an MVP, and then you're going to move into potentially a beta, and then you're going to move into the release. And then you're either going to get feedback from users or you're going to have your own opinions on what should improve. And this matrix is going to help you organize that, because a lot of what happens towards the end stages is a perfectionism, or is this idea that you can fix everything all at once, or that it all needs to be fixed in order to be released, and they can get super overwhelming. So keep this graph in mind, keep this matrix in mind, and hopefully it'll help you stay sane. Now, a quick explainer on this. You have two basic axes. You have implementation cost and leverage. Implementation cost is the cost of time or effort or problem solving that it's going to take to fix a bug or add a feature. Okay, if something is very complex and it's going to take multiple rounds of code, or it's just something that's going to require, big chunks or multiple pages communicating with each other, then you can imagine it's going to take a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of problem solving. Okay, so we're going to put that in the high zone. Same thing for the low. If it's low, like changing a heading or changing navigation or something like that, then it's in the low. Now, interesting thing about this matrix is that it shows you that it's not always, the harder you work, the better it is, because there are things that are going to be high leverage and low cost. Because by leverage, in this case, we mean something that'll make a big enough change that it'll abruptly change the user behavior or our outcomes, okay? And if you can identify the things that are high leverage and low implementation cost over and over, you'll continuously stay focused on the best things to do, okay? There's always going to be lots of things to do, but if you can stay focused here, you're going to make the most smart moves the quickest. And then obviously, once you're done here, you're going to move into this section, which is going to be things that you're going to want to allot some time for. High leverage, but high implementation costs, right? It could even require you to go find some help or something like that. But that's the order. You want to start with the high leverage, low cost, and then move into the high leverage, high cost, and then low implementation cost, low leverage, and then this one as far away as possible, right? If you can even eliminate that list, that's the best thing. You do not want to be dealing with things that are very costly and don't have any leverage. So that is the 101. And this is where we're going to end off for now. A quick little reminder, ship the fucking thing. And I put this here very loud and clear because, again, knowing what I know from my own experience and from watching other people create and deliver their own products, you're going to have a temptation to hold back on shipping. And what I mean by shipping, and what people mean by shipping in this case, is delivering the project, getting it out there into the public, and then starting to talk about it and market it. But actually have it available for people to sign up and use, okay? And this can happen for a couple of reasons. It can happen because you want it to be perfect and you have another feature idea, or there's this one edge case or a bug that comes up occasionally or something like that, and you're nervous that if someone sees it, they're going to completely bash it. That's going to be ridiculed online. People are going to create a Reddit thread that talks about it, and you're not going to be seen as an entrepreneur, taken seriously or something like that, and it's over. You're done skis, right? You don't want to think about that, okay? It's hardly ever going to be like that because people aren't going to, bash you if it's not this high-profile thing or anything like that, and chances are you're kind of starting from an unknown place. So really, don't try to solve for that necessarily, and just kind of push through, just send it off. And the other thing is wanting to continuously do it because you think that it can be better and it can solve more, but as it goes on, you're kind of breaking more things, and then so for legitimate reasons, you can't ship it, right? Because it's just not working because your new things are breaking the old things. So that is another kind of similar trap, and I guess you can break this down into like two big reasons, one being like fear of failure and one being like perfectionism. And if you can solve for those two things, then you will be the person that just ships things a lot quicker and with a little bit more detachment, if you will, from what happens in terms of, immediate success or anything like that, right? This is fundamentally a game. This is fundamentally of us creating products, of us creating widgets, tools, apps, web apps, whatever you want to call them, but they're creations, they're code, they're a mechanism, if you will, and then us releasing these mechanisms and then seeing if the mechanism is doing what it needs to do, right? Think of it in terms of like creating tools, like literally like DeWalt Husky tools, right? If you've ever done any at-home work, hanging up a picture or anything like that, you're mechanically inclined, I like to work on my cars, then you know that a good tool is it's worth its weight in gold. And the person that makes the tool is just solving a problem first and foremost. And then they think about packaging, and then they think about the other attachments you could add to that. Then they think about the grip and how nice it feels in your hands and stuff. But first and foremost, it has to be a good tool and solve the problem. So if you can keep that in mind and just think to yourself, I'm a tool builder and I do things that fix stuff. And then we'll think about the other stuff later, like the beauty and, the niceness of it all and the name of it all and the logo. And you can ship it and you can get feedback on whether or not it fixes the problem, and then make it fix the problem a lot more, a lot quicker, a lot better, then you're in a better spot. Okay? So, excuse me if you don't like cursing. You're going to hear some of that here. But I really do fundamentally believe this, okay? Because there are a lot of reasons that you can give yourself to not commit to something like this. And in other parts of life, right? Whether it's moving to a different city, whether it's, breaking up with someone, whether it's asking someone out, there are a lot of reasons we give ourselves and why it might not be the right time. But then you look up and you're 65 years old, man, and that happens little by little. At first you're 18, you look up, you're 21, and you're like, oh, crazy. Then you're 21, then you look up, you're 25, you're like, oh, wow, mid-20s. And then you're 25, and you wake up and you're 30, and it just goes on and on and on. And if you're not careful, right? If you're not careful, that stuff can really, really blindside you, okay? So got a little philosophical there, but if you think in the microcosm of it, we just want to make sure that we're not being perfectionists. We're not searching for the perfect moment. We are building something that is a critical tool, releasing it to the world, seeing if it actually is the tool that we thought it is, and then making the adjustments. And then we eventually will decide if it's worth it to pursue or not. So that's the 101. We're going to cut it there, keep it simple. From this point forward, you'll be watching your individualized series, and you're going to pay attention to the individual components. You guys are going to see everything that you need to, whatever series you go down. It's just going to be a bit more tailored to your individual profile, depending on who you are and where you are in life and stuff like that. That being said, you will have the fundamental tools that you need to actually ship the fucking thing, and let's get to it.